This one isn't instantly obvious to a lot of people. You tend to think of the targets, the people that you're trying to influence or you get an outcome from or to shift or to get decisions out of. You often think of them as being almost like faceless targets, people who are there for you to act upon, almost as if they are a passive problem to be solved. Now, sometimes they are, but don't start from there. You're working with people, they're all human too, to get the best outcomes, the best engagement, the best out of other people. It really helps if you take a second to stop and think about them, about what works for them, what makes their life easier, better, harder, all of those sorts of things. It's about empathy. Empathy gets you things that cleverness can't, and it's key. So have some empathy. Understand that the people that you're looking at, that you're trying to influence, have got a whole bunch of things going on as well. And when you do that, it actually helps you to work out how to influence, affect them, or intervene with them in a more effective way. So let me give you some examples. Politicians. I'm going to tell a little anecdote here. Years ago, I was training in a team with a couple of fairly new graduates who I was doing some training with to get them up to speed with public affairs, with campaigning and lobbying. And they had expressed the view that they didn't completely understand what a politician did exactly on a day-to-day basis. So I said, that's no problem, we'll organise you we'll go and have an informal coffee with a politician, you can just ask them. So what I set up a meeting with a politician I know, and what I did was I got them all to sit down and write down what they thought was the thing that was most likely to be taking up the time of detaining and causing problems for that politician that week. So, three of us, me and three others went, and one of them said, there's this big piece of legislation coming up and they're on the such and such committee. I bet they were really tied up scrutinising all the detail of this legislation. Another person says, the party's got this big initiative coming up. I bet they are spending their time working out strategy for all this kind of stuff. Someone else suggested, they've got a shadow job and probably what they were doing was going through the opposition's statements from the previous week and trying to find blah, blah, blah. So, having got all those written down, we went out for the coffee with the politician. And I sat down, and after the nicety of introduction, I just says, right, okay, we've been doing a wee exercise. Can you tell us what is it that's been giving you the biggest problems, the biggest headaches, and has been detaining your time this week? And the answer came back like a flash: septic tanks. It was septic tanks. There was a problem with overflowing septic tanks, a dispute between a number of people in a part of the constituency, blah, blah, blah. And however much time you think that should have been dedicated to scrutinising the legislation, it was getting heated and they had to spend time on septic tanks. It's always septic tanks. This is one of the mistakes that people make. Politicians have almost no time to sit back and do strategic thinking. It's constant churn of stuff. In the political sphere, there are balls coming over the net all the time. It's not chess, it's tennis. Balls are coming over the net, they're trying to whack them back, get them away. This is in parliamentary terms, it's a lot of garbage. I mean, really, there's an enormous amount of grinding, having to just do stuff, looking at evidence on the secondary legislation and the guidelines for something that was passed that nobody's interested in particularly but needs to get done, and it's the task of this committee. Politicians are rushing about all the time. They are constantly having to respond to things without a lot of time, often without much preparation. The skill set that a lot of politicians develop early on is to do meetings without preparation, make you feel like it went really well without committing to anything. Understand this. Understand that politicians only ever hear from people who are not happy. Nobody ever phones a politician up and say, hi, just to let you know, I'm really happy about my septic tank. So they're always under attack, always got these problems. When you understand that, when you understand the stress and the pressures that they're under, it helps you to understand how to communicate with them. It suddenly becomes aware that you might think that they really ought to read 8 sides of A4 to understand your basic point, but they're not going to, or probably not going to. You might think that shouting at them is how you get in the door, but remember, everyone that wants in the door is shouting at them. Maybe there's another way in. Maybe you suddenly realise, actually, you know something, there could be a better way to do this. Understand what it's like to be the other person. Journalists are under incredible pressure all the time. They're all massively overworked now. The decline in the number of journalists in Scotland is shocking. And they're now producing maybe 4 or 5 times the amount of, I used to be a journalist, they're now producing maybe 4 or 5 times the amount of content every day that a journalist did when I was a journalist. So if you phone them up and you give them a story, but you expect them to do a lot of work, here's the kernel of the story. Why don't you go away and chase this? Yeah, well, that's the days of Woodward and Bernstein are gone. They probably don't have time to go and chase it. If you want to get that in, understand it. Understand that they need to get things that make their life as easy as possible, not as difficult as possible. So what does that mean? How do you go about doing that? Let's say that what you're dealing with is officials. Officials are a very mixed bunch because they've got all sorts of different incentives and priorities. But broadly, officials will either be rather high-handed and likely to just dismiss the stuff that you're saying because, you know, they've got it covered, thank you very much. If we thought that was a good idea, we'd have done it already, blah, blah, blah. Or they tend to be incredibly non-committal because quite often an official can't actually make the final decision. And so they spend all their time in a meeting trying not to commit to, or even appearing to commit to anything, or even agree with anything. Don't feel too intimidated by an offhand official who's dogmatic and telling you it's not going to be that way. It's just what they do. Don't feel too happy about an official who really gives you a good listen to, you know, really listens to what you're saying, if they're not actually committing to any of the things that you went in to ask for. So be conscious of all of that, but then remember, they might not be able to make the decision. Be conscious of that. Or they might have been stung many times before with people coming in with ideas kind of like yours that didn't work out or which they'd rejected in the past, and they're just doing the same thing again. Understand it. Now, this is super important, and I emphasize this a lot because the more that you're capable of talking to somebody with an understanding of what's on their mind, how they're feeling at any given moment, the more chance you have of communicating effectively. So I'm not always the biggest fan of schemata and ways of, you know, acronyms and ways of doing things and different graphs and charts and all those sort of things. But this one's actually quite useful when you're trying to do that. And it's just a little, you can just draw a cross. It's basically 4 quadrants. And at the top, what you have is, you can write down, got to think of a specific person. It can't be completely general. It's got to be a kind of person. Young mother, retired, blue-collar worker, whatever. You know, be specific about what you're trying to think about. So it could be politician, backbench politician, cabinet politician. It could be council official, senior council official, whatever it is. So think about it specifically. And then think in these 4 axes. And at the top, it's pain. What causes this person pain? What irritates, annoys them? What is difficult for them? And be careful here, because people quite often assume that this is always high-level stuff. But remember that if you're trying to think about how someone's day's been going, it could be that parking's the thing. Commuting, parking. If you've got a meeting first thing in the morning and someone's just coming off a long commute and there's been delays and they've had to run to the meeting, whatever, just be conscious of that. Their life gives them difficulty. People complaining at them all the time gives them difficulty. The bureaucracies internally give them difficulty. Be aware, think as many as you can of the things that cause them pain. What are the things that give them pleasure? What is it that's the opposite of that? What is the thing that they enjoy during the day? So for example, some officials love working with community groups. They'll love to go out and visit. They'll love to go out and see people. Politicians love to have something which is positive for them that they could use in a leaflet, a comment, a quote about their performance, which is really good. This is something that makes them happy. Remember, they'll have parking problems too. Everybody's got parking problems, or something like that. And then think about their values. So write down, what is it that they actually value? What do they think is actually good? So for a politician, you might find that quite easy if they're left-wing, or if they're right-wing, if they're environmentally minded or whatever. But what about an official? What are the values of an official? Perhaps you suspect that they're going to be particularly interested in efficient, competent, well-organised activities. Perhaps you think that what they really value is good engagement with stakeholders, whatever it is. And then at the other side, write down tasks. So this is what actually takes their time up. What is the thing that actually detains them? You can have all the values in the world, you can have all the pains and pleasures in the world, but what is it that's actually sucking you down a hole? So for a politician, like I say, dealing with constituency problems could be the thing that you write down there, or it could be a hostile media story about them which has been plaguing their mind, and it's taking them a lot of time to deal with it and to come out from the other side of it. Or it could indeed be a busy parliamentary timetable, and this is just what they're getting sucked into. Now, that process gives you not a generalised, but a more specific way of visualising the person, your target, their life. And then you've got to just do a simple thing, which is, in whatever it is that you've already decided you do, so this is about how you do it, this is not about what you do. So you've decided you're going to go and do this meeting, or you're going to run this campaign, or you're going to send this letter, or you're going to organise this protest. You'll get more luck if, and again, it's always reduced, but you'll get more luck if you reduce their pain in terms of empathy, reduce their pain, increase their pleasure, speak to their values, and reduce their tasks. Right? So think in those terms. All the things that I've said, whatever it is that you're pitching, how do I hit a sweet spot in here which says this is actually making something that's bad for them less bad? So let's say it's a community campaign, and there's a very unhappy community because a village hall's getting closed, or a primary school, or whatever, and this is causing them a lot of problem, a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty. Well, be conscious of the fact that if they reverse the decision, or the decision is reversed, that pain, that problem, that will diminish. So you're trying to help them to diminish the things that are causing them pain. Or let's say that the revamped community centre that you've just saved and it's all been done up is going to look great, and and you know that there's an election coming up, and the politician that helped you out has got leaflets to do. Organise an event for them. Get them out there with happy smiling kids or whatever it is, and give them a nice photo opportunity. Increase their pleasure. Values. Now, careful, politicians talk a lot about values. They're maybe not as heavily weighted as you might think. It's actually others, for example, donors, charitable people that give charitable money. Values are really important in how they're making a decision. Politicians have values that they have to project. I mean, none of them admit to being climate change deniers, for example. It doesn't necessarily mean that their commitment to net zero is a value that they're actually motivating, but speak to their values. So if you're talking to a Tory councillor and you think, well, this is a progressive social sort of project, you might conclude that, well, let's not present it in that way. Let's talk about this as a self-resilient traditional community. It's a good traditional community looking after itself. Think about speaking to those values. And then think about tasks. I can't emphasize this enough. Anything that makes someone's life easier has more chance than something that makes it harder. This is what I was saying about the journalist. If you go to them and you say, here's a brilliant story, now you go away and do all the work, then you've got less chance than if you go and say, right, here's a brilliant story, and we've done a bunch of the work. So for example, don't send them off to find 4 or 5 people in the community to get quotes from or statements from. Do it in advance. Make their life easier. Don't say you can find this if you go and browse on such and such, or if you go into the council minutes. Cut out bits of the council minutes and send it to them so they've got it. But equally, if you're sending stuff to, say, a journalist and they're busy, don't send them 40 pages if you can avoid it. Send them 5 or less if you can get it across. make the tasks that you are pushing on them or tasks that they already have, which are impacted by what you do, make it as little as you possibly can. Now, of course, there are occasions when increasing pain and reducing pleasure is a motivator. So, i.e., you want to kick a politician around. But even there, think about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it, and give them a route back. We will cause you difficulty if you don't do this, but if you do this, we will reduce it further down. Now, this really helps you engaging with people. It really helps you with developing strategy. It really helps you with tone. Think specifically about who you are targeting. And I haven't actually mentioned this here, but one of your targets might be the general public. And that works exactly the same way. Let's say that your campaign is round about childcare. So who do you think is most likely to be responsible for childcare? Profile them. Might be 4 or 5 different profiles of person. Think about what's causing them pain. Well, if any of you get young kids, you know exactly what that is. What is giving them pleasure? Glass of wine, 5 minutes of adult company, which doesn't involve screaming kids. What are their values? Well, this is a point in their life when they're really into a tight family, and you'll find out a lot about their values. And what are their tasks? Oh, driving kids back and forward to nursery, whatever it is. Make the tasks easier if you can. Make the pain easier if you can. Make the pleasure greater if you can. Make the values more resonant if you can. The more that you can do that, the more that the way that you are communicating and targeting the people that you're talking to will be geared not to an imaginary version of them, but to the actual them. Take time to consider the life of the person you're trying to influence. Don't treat them like an automaton. Treat them like a person who's got all the problems that you do, and you'll have a much better chance of calibrating all your engagements with them and all the things that you send to them, and you'll have a much lower chance of wasting people's time, pissing them off accidentally, annoying them, or dropping a whole pile of work on them which they could really do without. This is what gives you the maximum chance of getting them to do the thing that you want to do. Have empathy. For each of the short videos in this course on how to build up a campaign, you'll find on the Commonweal's Campaign Centre there is a little worksheet which will recap the things we've just talked about, will give you the key learning points that you need to remember, and it'll give you a couple of little exercises that you can try out to put these skills into practice for real. If you go to Commonweal's Campaign Centre, you'll find all the materials there. Give them a shot, see how you get on with them, and if you've got questions, don't hesitate to drop an email, or better still, put a message into Campaign Centre. There'll be lots of other people with campaign experience who are there and who want to help you develop and build your skills.